The moment you stop reacting, the world loses its power over you. Every morning, before anything real has even happened, your mind is already moving. Replaying yesterday, anticipating tomorrow, holding on to things that haven't even touched reality yet. And without noticing it, you are already carrying weight that does not belong to this moment. It feels normal. It feels responsible, even. But most of what exhausts you was never required of you in the first place.
Welcome to True Stoic Journal, the path to inner control.
The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius observed that the mind turns simple things into burdens. Not because life is heavy, but because we grip everything too tightly. You try to control outcomes, manage perceptions, and prepare for everything. But the tighter you hold, the more unstable everything feels. And somewhere in that effort, your peace quietly disappears. There is a different way to live. You still care, but not in a way that drains you. You still act, but without the constant tension beneath it. And the moment you begin to see that clearly, even slightly, something starts to shift. Not outside of you, but within you. You have probably noticed how quickly your mind attaches itself to things. A small comment becomes hours of overthinking. A delay turns into a story about failure. Someone's tone starts to feel like a judgment of your worth. It happens fast. So fast you don't even see the moment it begins. 1 second, something neutral happens. Next, your mind has already built a story around it. Layered, emotional, personal. And most of the time, it isn't even real. This pattern isn't about importance. It is about conditioning. Your mind has learned to treat everything as urgent. Everything is meaningful. Everything is something that requires a reaction. It doesn't filter. It reacts. A passing remark feels like criticism. A small inconvenience feels like a threat. And because it feels automatic, it feels true. But when everything feels important, nothing is filtered. And when nothing is filtered, everything becomes heavy. You carry that weight into everything, conversations, decisions, even quiet moments. It shows up as tension, as restlessness, as a constant mental noise that never really stops. And after a while, you stop questioning it. You assume this is just how life feels. But it isn't. Most of that weight isn't coming from reality. It is coming from how your mind is interacting with it. This is where something begins to shift. The moment you start observing your thoughts instead of following them, you create space. You begin to see the difference between what happens and what your mind adds to it. That space is small, but it changes everything. Because now, not every thought feels convincing. Not every interpretation feels true. You start to notice that some thoughts don't deserve your agreement. That is where clarity begins. As Marcus Aurelius put it, you have power over your mind, not outside events. And that realization shifts your focus completely. Not toward controlling life, but toward understanding your response to it. Because most moments don't need a reaction. They pass on their own quietly and naturally. But the mind doesn't let them pass. It holds, replays, analyzes, and over time, that becomes exhausting. The shift isn't about resisting your thoughts. It is about noticing them. Catching the moment when a simple event becomes a complex story, and pausing. That pause is small, but it interrupts everything. It gives you just enough distance to choose differently. At first, that choice isn't easy. The pull of old habits is strong. The urge to analyze, to personalize, to react, it feels automatic. But with awareness, something changes. You begin to see that not everything needs your involvement. Some things can exist without becoming something bigger. If this way of seeing things is starting to make sense to you, then stay with it. And if you want to keep building this kind of clarity, this kind of control over your own mind, then consider subscribing. Not just as a habit, but as a decision. A decision to keep removing what doesn't serve you. Consider this more carefully because it's easy to miss. The weight you feel throughout the day doesn't always come from what's happening around you. It often comes from how you are holding on to what's happening. There is a subtle tension in the way most people move through life. A constant tightening, a quiet effort to control outcomes, to prevent mistakes, to make sure nothing goes wrong. It feels like responsibility. But underneath that, there is strain. Think of holding something delicate in your hands. The instinct is to grip it tightly to make sure it doesn't fall. But the tighter you hold it, the more your hands shake, the more your muscles tense, the more unnatural your movements become. The very act of trying to protect it begins to make you unstable. But when you loosen your grip just enough, something shifts. Your movements become smoother. Your body relaxes. You are still holding it, but you are no longer fighting it. Life works similarly. Most of the tension you feel isn't coming from what you're carrying, but from how rigidly you're trying to carry it. You hold on to outcomes as if they must happen a certain way. You hold on to people as if their behavior must align with your expectations. You hold on to plans as if deviation means failure. And in doing so, you create a constant internal pressure that has nothing to do with reality itself. Epictetus expressed it simply: make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. There is a quiet strength in that idea. Not passive acceptance, but a shift in where you place your effort. Instead of trying to control everything, you focus only on what is actually yours to influence. Everything else is allowed to unfold without resistance. At first, this feels uncomfortable. Letting go of that tight grip can feel like losing control. There is a sense that if you don't hold on as firmly, things might fall apart. But if you look closely at your experience, you start to notice something. Most things were never fully under your control to begin with. The outcome of a situation, the reaction of another person, the timing of events, these have always existed outside your reach. The only difference is that now you are no longer exhausting yourself trying to manage them. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care differently. You still show up. You still put in effort. You still act with intention. But you are no longer tying your sense of stability to outcomes that you can't guarantee. You begin to trust that you can handle what arises without preemptively tightening around it. You begin to see that your strength doesn't come from holding on harder, but from knowing when to loosen your grip. The confusion comes from equating attachment with care. People believe that the more attached they are to an outcome, the more they care about it. But attachment isn't the same as commitment. Attachment is rigid. It demands a specific result. It creates tension. Commitment, on the other hand, is steady. It focuses on effort, on intention, on showing up consistently regardless of how things unfold. And when you begin to separate those two, you start to see how much unnecessary pressure you've been carrying. When you're deeply attached, even a small deviation feels like a major disruption. But when you're committed without attachment, you adjust. You respond. You move forward without turning the moment into something bigger than it needs to be. The mind has taken on the role of a protector. It believes its job is to constantly scan for problems, to stay one step ahead of anything that could disrupt your sense of stability. It looks for risks and tries to prepare you by running through scenarios in advance. It takes a single possibility and replays it in different forms, adding detail, adding emotion, making it feel more real with each pass. And as it does this, your body responds as if the situation is already happening. Your heart rate shifts, your muscles tighten. You are experiencing it as if it already has. But most of what you worry about never unfolds in the way you imagined. What it does, more often than not, is drain your energy in advance. It takes moments that could have been calm and fills them with tension. Seneca captured this precisely: we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The goal isn't to stop thinking about the future entirely. Planning and reflecting are useful. The issue arises when those processes become automatic and repetitive. When you reach that point, continuing to engage with those thoughts doesn't bring clarity. It brings fatigue. Instead of trying to force your thoughts to stop, you start to recognize when they have stopped being useful. You see the pattern. You notice when your mind is replaying something that doesn't need to be replayed. And in that moment, you step back. Not by resisting the thought, but by not feeding it further. There is a quiet habit most people carry without realizing it. The tendency to take things personally, even when those things were never truly about them in the first place. A shift in someone's tone feels like rejection. A delayed response feels like disinterest. A critical remark feels like a direct attack on your worth. But when you slow things down, something becomes visible. People act based on their own internal state, not yours. Their stress, their distractions, their insecurities. These are the forces shaping their behavior. A sharp tone might come from their own frustration. A lack of response might come from their own preoccupation. And yet, without awareness, you absorb it all. You take in the tone, the silence, the words, and you turn them into something personal. You hold on to tension that originated somewhere else. This is where a shift begins to matter. A moment where, instead of immediately internalizing what happens, you pause and look at it more objectively. You ask yourself whether this situation truly belongs to you, or whether you have simply taken it on out of habit. As you begin to see this more clearly, your relationship with other people starts to change. You stop assuming that everything is about you. You stop interpreting every action as a reflection of your worth. At the same time, you begin to feel lighter. Not because people have changed, but because you have stopped carrying what was never yours. You realize that you don't need to process every tone, every expression, every word as if it were directed at your core. Not everything deserves your reaction. Not everything deserves your energy. At first, this shift doesn't feel comfortable. It feels unfamiliar. Holding on tightly to outcomes and expectations gives the illusion of stability. It feels like you are reducing uncertainty. But when you begin to let go, there is a moment where that illusion fades, and it can feel unsettling. That discomfort is natural. It is what happens when a deeply ingrained habit starts to loosen. But if you stay with it, the initial discomfort gives way to a different kind of experience. One that feels lighter, more open, less constrained. Situations that once triggered immediate tension begin to feel less intense. You are no longer bracing yourself. You are no longer trying to force everything into a specific outcome. There is a subtle easing that happens in your body. The constant background tension begins to soften. Moments that would have previously felt overwhelming begin to pass with less resistance. They still happen, but they don't linger. They move through your experience instead of getting stuck in it. Seneca said, "A man who suffers before it is necessary, suffers more than is necessary." That suffering often comes from resisting what is already happening or trying to prevent what hasn't happened yet. And when you begin to let go of that resistance, the unnecessary layer of struggle fades. What replaces it isn't passivity. It is a different kind of engagement. You still act. You still make decisions. But you are no longer tying your sense of stability to whether things go exactly as planned. Instead, you begin to trust your ability to respond rather than trying to control every possible outcome in advance. You begin to see that stability doesn't come from controlling everything around you. It comes from how you relate to it. And when that relationship shifts from resistance to acceptance, from tension to ease, from control to clarity, the entire experience of life begins to change. What once felt heavy begins to feel manageable. What once felt overwhelming begins to feel navigable. And what once required constant effort begins to unfold with a kind of natural rhythm. Not because life has changed, but because you have. Healthily caring less doesn't mean stepping back from everything or becoming distant. It means stepping into things fully, but without tying your sense of peace to how they turn out. You start to notice it in your work. You still give effort, but there is less pressure behind it. You focus on what you can actually influence, your attention, your discipline, your consistency. It shows up in relationships as well. You care about people. You listen. But you are no longer trying to control how they feel about you or how they respond. You stop trying to secure approval or avoid every possible misunderstanding. You allow connections to exist as they are without forcing them into a shape that makes you feel safe. Do what you will. Even if you tear yourself apart, most people will continue doing the same things. You cannot control how others act, how they think, or how they respond. And once you accept that fully, you stop exhausting yourself trying to manage it. Your attention naturally returns to what is actually yours, your actions, your decisions, your mindset. You also begin to recognize how much you were carrying before. Unnecessary thoughts, expectations, and emotional reactions that added weight without adding value. You stop turning every situation into something that needs to be controlled, analyzed, or fixed immediately. You allow things to unfold, and you respond when it is necessary rather than reacting to everything automatically. You were never meant to carry everything. You were never meant to manage every outcome, to absorb every emotion, to control every detail. That expectation was something you learned. And now you can let it go. There is a quiet strength that begins to form when you stop reacting to everything. It doesn't make you distant. It makes you steady. You start to move through situations with more clarity, less urgency, and far less noise in your mind. Things that once pulled you in no longer have the same grip. You begin to realize that peace isn't something you find outside, but something you protect within. At the end of it all, nothing outside of you needed to change. The noise, the pressure, the uncertainty, it was always going to be there. The real shift happened within you. In how you choose to respond, in what you choose to carry, and in what you finally decide to let go of. That is where your peace lives. If something in this stayed with you, don't let it fade here. There is another video on your screen right now that will help you go even deeper into this way of thinking. Take that next step while it is still fresh in your mind. And truly, thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal.